It's not often that we get to hear about the most iconic weapons of the medieval age being created right in front of us, but with our blacksmith today, he has created some amazing replicas of just that. The first weapon that he created is one of my favorites, the Morning Star. The Morning Star was a brutal blunt force medieval weapon, its name coming from the French phrase main d'oeuvre, which translates to morning hand. It was said that this would be the last thing that an opponent would see in the morning before they died. The beauty of the design is in its simplicity. A central spike surrounded by a ring that can be deadly at both close range and long range. This makes it the perfect choice for both offensive and defensive combat. There are no sharp edges for your enemy to cut or stab you with. Only the head of the spike could do damage, and that only if you let it hit you. However, the sheer force of swinging a massive spiked ball was enough to break bones and crack skulls. And like many medieval weapons, if you were to hit someone with the side of it, you would be able to knock them out cold, if you wanted to use this as a projectile weapon. There was also a cross-colored design in the center of the spike where you could insert a dart or arrow so that it could be thrown or shot from a crossbow. So while it may not have been used in the same way as other medieval weapons, the Morning Star is still one of the most effective. As a side note, the blacksmith actually made two versions of the Morning Star. One is slightly smaller and has 6 spikes around the edge, while the other is larger and has 8. Both are very cool and both will make excellent additions to any collection. Next up is something a bit more classic, a medieval shield. Shields were obviously used throughout the medieval period, with their designs changing depending on what was popular at the time and who was using them. Some were designed to deflect arrows, while others were meant to protect against direct attacks with swords and maces. Others were too small to be practical in battle but were used instead by infantry to keep them in formation. Still, others were even equipped with spikes to hold a horse or ram straight. No matter how they were used, they were an important part of any medieval warrior's equipment. And this replica is a beautiful example of the type of shield that would have been commonly used. They were usually made from wood and covered in leather to help protect the warrior, and the wood from moisture and splintering. These two together made them incredibly durable, and thanks to the metal reinforcements, this particular shield should last for years. Plus, it looks amazing, with the leather adding a nice contrast to the metal studs and border. When you think of a medieval warrior, this is exactly the kind of shield that comes to mind. One of the best things about a weapon or piece of armor is the story behind it. Each one has a history all of its own. Take this medieval sword, for example. Swords have been around for centuries, with their designs constantly evolving over time. In the medieval period, swords were primarily used by knights and other high-ranking members of the military. They were typically worn on the hip and were used for both offense and defense. This particular sword dates back to the 14th century, which was a time when swords were becoming longer and more slender. The blade was also becoming more curved, which made it easier to slash and thrust. This was likely due to the influence of Asian sword designs, which had become popular in Europe during the Crusades. The hilt and crossguard of the sword were also becoming more elaborate during this time, often featuring intricate carvings and decorations. This was a way to display the wealth and power of the sword's owner. The sword was typically made from iron or steel and was very expensive to produce, which made them rare and valuable items. With proper care, a good sword could last for generations, being passed down from father to son or being handed out as a reward for valor in battle. While this particular sword is just a replica, it's still an incredible work of art and a reminder of the skill and craftsmanship of medieval blacksmiths. It is also a symbol of the medieval warrior code and the importance of honor and bravery in battle. Speaking of which, another great example of a medieval weapon is the Viking battle axe. The axe has been around for thousands of years, but it wasn't until the Viking Age that the battle axe really came into its own. Vikings were fierce warriors and they needed weapons that could match their strength and ferocity. The battle axe was the perfect weapon for them. It was deadly in close-quarters combat and could easily take an opponent's head off. The Vikings were known for their skill in battle and they used their axes to great effect. They would often throw their axes at their opponents, then follow up with a vicious blow from their swords or shields. But do I think that the Vikings were uncivilized barbarians who just ran around hacking people's heads off with their axes? They were actually highly skilled warriors with a deep understanding of battle tactics. They knew how to use their axes to their full potential and they were able to use them in a variety of different ways. For example, they could use their axes to defend themselves against incoming attacks, deflecting blows from swords and spears with ease. They could also use their axes to control the battlefield, throwing them at their opponents to create openings for themselves or their allies. Overall, the Viking battle axe is an impressive weapon and a reminder of the skill and ferocity of the Vikings. It's also a symbol of the brutality of medieval warfare, but hey, what's a little bloodshed among friends? Medieval helmets were an essential part of a knight's armor, providing protection from the elements and from enemy attacks. This replica helmet dates back to the 14th century, a time when helmets were becoming more stylized and ornate. The 14th century was a time of great change in Europe. The Black Death had ravaged the continent, killing millions and changing the social and economic order. The 100 Years' War was raging between England and France, and new technologies were emerging that would change the course of history. During this time period, helmets became more decorative, reflecting the wealth and status of the knight who wore them. The bassinet, a type of helmet that was popular during the 14th century, was often decorated with elaborate patterns and designs. The shape of the helmet was also changing during this time, with some helmets becoming taller and more narrow. This allowed for more mobility and flexibility in battle, as well as providing more protection from direct attacks. The visor or face guard was also becoming more common during this time period. Early visors were simple metal plates that covered the face, but they soon evolved into more complex designs that allowed for better visibility and airflow. These advancements in technology and design made it possible for knights to fight more effectively in battle while also looking more impressive than ever before. When we think of the Middle Ages, images of knights in shining armor probably come to mind. But what about the weapons that they used? Medieval bows and arrows were incredibly versatile tools used by both soldiers and civilians alike. Bows were made from a variety of materials including wood, bone, and horn, and could be used for hunting or for defense. Longbows were particularly popular during the medieval period and were known for their accuracy and power. These bows were typically made from yew wood, which was strong and flexible and could shoot an arrow up to 300 yards. Crossbows were also used during the Middle Ages and were known for their power and precision. They consisted of a wooden frame that was bent into a bow shape and strung with a strong cord. Crossbows could shoot arrows, bolts, or even small projectiles and were often used for hunting or for defending castles and city walls. Overall, medieval bows and arrows were an essential part of life during the Middle Ages and were used for a variety of purposes. From hunting to war, these weapons were incredibly versatile and were an important part of medieval culture. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the weapons and armor used during the Middle Ages. Which piece of armor piqued your interest the most? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then.